supplements are a waste of money.
That's a myth.
It's a myth.
I think, there's some context and nuance.
You did not need thinking music.
Can I extend?
Please,
Can I elaborate?
please.
So I think there are, I did a video on this, I think there are kind of 4 or 5 good supplements for people to kind of consider broadly.
Oh, please tell me what
depending on
they
who
are.
they are. Top of that list would be creatine.
Oh, yes. Thank you very much. Sorry, that's my wife's listening right now. I'm just saying that for her.
I can see the biceps over there.
I do have my
So
creatine every day.
creatine.
And the funny thing about creatine
Tickled
is,
pink.
I think people assume it's just for muscles.
That's what I thought. I thought it was
Body
like,
kind of thing.
oh,
There's some, it certainly is helpful for building strength, which is important as we age for longevity, but it's also, there's emerging research showing it's beneficial for cognition. There was a pilot study that just came out a couple months ago, so pretty hot off the press, where they took adults with depression and randomized them to cognitive behavioral therapy, which we know can be effective, and then cognitive behavioral therapy plus 5 grams of creatine per day. Both groups had significant benefits, but the group with the added creatine had significant benefits compared to just the cognitive behavioral therapy. That was only an 8-week study, so we'd like to see it go longer, but there was 100 participants, and it kind of builds on some other evidence in that space. Mechanism not fully understood. There's also some evidence showing creatine supplementation at about 10 grams a day can be beneficial for bone health in postmenopausal women and risk of osteoporosis, osteopenia, osteoporosis, and fractures becomes heightened after the age of about 60 for women. So that's another kind of good indication to use creatine. And then one that I thought was very helpful, certainly for me as I travel, these researchers looked at sleep deprivation, and they somehow convinced people to come in and in their lab keep them up all night. And this was a randomized crossover trial. And they would measure throughout the night different cognitive tasks when they're either taking a placebo or creatine. And it was high-dose creatine. This was about 30 grams of creatine, which is a very high dose. And cognition was significantly improved after sleep deprivation when you were supplementing with creatine.
interesting.
And the explanation for that is that at a high dose, essentially the creatine initially, as you're starting creatine, it saturates muscle cells. And then over time, as you increase the dose or take it for longer, there's enough creatine left to cross the blood-brain barrier and enter the brain. And it can affect sort of brain metabolism.
So I imagine it would be very good for people who are struggling to get proper sleep and need to operate on a daily basis.
Yeah, and this was an acute study, so they were looking at sleep depriving people and then measuring cognition through the night and the next day. So I don't know whether it's something you would want to be doing 30 grams every day all the time.
Yeah.
That evidence certainly doesn't speak to that. But the one thing and why creatine's at the top of my list is not only are these very consistent kind of benefits borne out in the evidence, but the safety profile is really good. Okay. So at worst, people may experience some kind of GI nausea in the 15, 20 minutes after having creatine. And one way around that is splitting the dose. So if you are doing a high dose, like a 10 grams or 20 grams over a day, instead of just having that all at once, you could split that morning and night and have it with food.
Mm-hmm. And the great thing is that you get them as like delicious gummies now, either apple or raspberry.
I didn't know.
Those are a problem. A
problem in
They're so
you
nice.
want to have more.
They're just too good.
Yeah.
They're just too good. I actually have some.
I mean, I
have
don't
some in
know.
my bag now.
You've got to be careful about which gummies you bring into.
I get my creatine gummies just at the corner of Smith Street. It's from a guy called Warren.
But that's creatine. Then I just quickly reel it off.
Is anyone else just like praying that their supplements are on this list?
I don't take it. I take zero supplements. So
I'm confident. Go.
Okay, so omega-3 DHA EPA, which can be found in a fish oil or an algae oil, that really for someone who's not eating fatty fish 2 or 3 times a week, which the average Australian's not. But if you are, then you probably don't need to go out and buy that supplement. But if you're not eating fatty fish 2 or 3 times a week, then you'll likely benefit from that.
Would that classify under a vegan diet if someone's vegan?
A vegan diet they wouldn't be eating the fish, so they could supplement with the algae oil.
Algae oil.
Yeah.
Okay,
So the fish get the DHA and EPA omega-3s either by eating a fish that essentially the EPA and DHA passes up the food chain from algae.
Gotcha.
Oh,
So
wow.
they can either eat it directly
Wow.
from the algae or from another fish that
Yeah,
ate the
right,
algae.
okay.
Okay, gotcha. There's that. That's
There's
second.
that. So that's second. I would say a multivitamin depends. This is dependent on the person. One of the things, like as you move to a more plant rich, kind of high fiber, less animal protein diet, all diets come with their limitations. The pros of that, I've explained before, is that your cardiometabolic health and risk factors for type 2 diabetes, et cetera, shift in a favorable direction. One of the downsides is that there are nutrients of focus, and there is a potential to have inadequate intake of certain micronutrients. So if you're someone that is eating a vegetarian or vegan diet, I certainly recommend a multivitamin.
Mm-hmm. And which vitamins would be in that multi?
So the key ones within that dietary pattern are going to be B12, iron. We're going to have, they're already taking their omega-3 fish oil, selenium and zinc.
Right.
Are like the big kind of 5.
Great. Okay.
So multivitamin, and then I would say like a prebiotic. So I formulated a prebiotic called DMN, Daily Microbiome Nutrition. So I can flag that I'm involved with this brand. I'm not saying everyone needs it.
Yeah.
It's by a company called 38 Terra, and that has been formulated essentially as a multivitamin, but for your microbiome.
Wow.
So you know, before I mentioned there's 3 classes of prebiotics. So you've got prebiotic fiber, resistant starch, and polyphenols.
Yeah.
And so that product, Daily Microbiome Nutrition, contains those using ingredients that have been clinically studied in randomized controlled trials in the right dose to feed various species of bacteria that we know are beneficial. So to improve bowel movements, to improve the gut lining, which kind of lowers kind of permeability and inflammation. Those are at the top of my list.
Great.
Now none of those I would say are absolutely essential for people. The essential ones would be where someone's not getting a micronutrient in their diet, like a vegan diet, and you don't have DHA and EPA, the omega-3s, or you don't have B12, right? A lot of those other ones are more around optimizing and nice to haves.
Yeah, okay.
Magnesium? Magnesium, is that one? I thought that was going to be in the top 5, but no.
It's not in my top 5, but it's certainly, if someone's under consuming magnesium, it can be helpful. In a plant-rich diet, if you're eating a very plant-rich diet, you're getting a lot of magnesium. Okay. It's one of the benefits of it.
Can I ask a supplementary game show question?
A supplement question?
Yeah. So, it's good. The myth that I should be getting that stuff in food as opposed to a pill, is that because obviously if you're vegan or are you having a restricted eating for whatever reason, you're not going to get them. But am I better to try and get it in food than in a pill?
Let's take something like creatine.
Yeah.
So creatine is found in certain foods. It's found in, your body makes about 1 gram of creatine a day, and then the average omnivore gets about 1 gram of creatine through like red meat, some in eggs, a few different animal foods, a little bit in dairy. The problem is to get 5 to 10 grams of creatine a day out of animal foods, you'd have to be consuming copious amounts of that.
Yeah.
And then what you're doing is you're getting increased exposure to saturated fat, heme iron, which we know is associated with cardiovascular disease.
Yeah.
So it's possible to get it through the diet, but it might not be optimal from a longevity point of view.
Okay.
And then certain micronutrients like B12. Yeah, I think if you can get it through diet and it fits within your dietary approach.
I guess something that you can implement over a long course of time.
Like if someone's eating an omnivorous diet, they don't need to worry about supplementing with B12. B12 is really for that person who's eating a vegetarian or vegan diet. Maybe they've gone that way for planetary health or ethical reasons. we don't want that person to develop a B12 deficiency.
Yeah.
Because that can have a number of negative consequences, and it's easy for them to add it to their kind of daily regime in a form that we know is bioavailable. It will help them maintain healthy B12 status.
Great.
The other one that I didn't mention in the multi was iodine. Yeah.
Okay. Just a little like alarm bell goes off in my head when you say like, okay, well, the body only creates with creatine. The body only creates 1 milligram a day, and through eating the foods that we would naturally eat, we can only do another. So I'm going to go, well, does the body need that much creatine, or why does the body need that much creatine if it's never been something that we've got before?
I guess this brings us back to evolution and kind of the biology that we have in our genes are really shaped through evolution, which is determined by what has helped us survive. So evolution is all about getting to an age to procreate. It's not necessarily the best genes for avoiding osteoporosis or cancer or living a long life, right? Because evolution essentially doesn't care about you too much once you've already had children. So there's been no selection pressure on our genetic makeup to give us these genes that help us live to 100.
Gotcha.
Our body and like our body's physiology and the nutrients that we're synthesizing and that we're not, all of that has been shaped over hundreds of thousands of years to get us to a point where we can have children. It hasn't been shaped to get us to 70, 80, 90 in good health.
Yeah, sure. Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So essentially what our body is just doing naturally, there is no reason to believe that is best also for long-term health. It's logical. It makes sense. Like I understand your point. It's called the naturalistic fallacy. But it just comes back to understanding what evolution is, and then appreciating that we can use science to go back and test some of those things, right? And in this case, we're seeing, pretty consistent across the board benefits to supplementing with creatine above a level that your body would naturally produce every day.
When it comes to supplements, only a select few make my must-have list. And at the very top of that list is creatine. But here's the thing. Creatine isn't just for bodybuilders or gym enthusiasts. It's really a game changer for almost everyone. Let's start with some basics. What exactly is creatine? Creatine is a non-protein amino acid that the body produces, mostly in the liver, but also the pancreas and the kidneys, which plays an important role in cellular metabolism and energy production within important organs that have high energy demands, such as muscle, brain, heart, and bone tissues. Essentially, having creatine around helps cells in these tissues produce more ATP. Our cells need this ATP on hand to function optimally. About 95% of the body's creatine is found in muscle cells, and most of the remainder is found in brain, bone, and heart cells. So keeping it very, very simple, creatine is an amino acid that allows your cells to function as they should. A non-protein amino acid means that unlike amino acids like leucine and valine, which you may have heard of, creatine is not used to synthesize proteins, but rather has direct effects on physiology as an amino acid itself. The key takeaway here being that creatine is important for energy production and metabolism, and the body is able to manufacture it. In fact, the liver, pancreas, and kidneys produce about 1 gram of creatine per day from the amino acids arginine, glycine, and methionine. And the average person eating an omnivorous Western diet gets another 1 gram or so per day through animal foods such as red meat and fish, which are relatively rich in creatine. Let's talk about what type of creatine is best, what dose is most optimal, and what the safety profile of creatine is like. There are a bunch of different types of creatine that you'll find online and in your local supplement stores. Creatine monohydrate is the most common, but you may also see creatine ethyl ester or CEE, creatine hydrochloride or HCl, creatine magnesium chelate, and buffered creatine, also called Cre-alkaline. So what is the most effective form of creatine? Well, there's no science to my knowledge that suggests any of these less common forms of creatine are more effective than creatine monohydrate at inducing the health benefits we've gone through in this episode. In fact, creatine monohydrate is the form of creatine that is far and away the most studied and science-supported form of creatine. Here's a conclusion from a recent review of clinical trials investigating creatine, and I quote, "Based on the current meta-analysis, creatine monohydrate is well studied, effective, has a well-developed safety profile, and is economical. Additionally, confirmed by a previous review, creatine monohydrate is the only source of creatine that has substantial evidence to support bioavailability, efficacy, and safety recommended by professional societies and organizations. Future research may be warranted to explore alternative forms of creatine. However, presently it is clear that other forms of creatine are not superior to creatine monohydrate." End quote. My assumption is that these other forms of creatine have popped up and often claim to be superior without strong evidence because creatine monohydrate is a very cheap supplement to make, and there are literally thousands of brands globally selling it, which makes it relatively inexpensive to the consumer. Choosing to go with a more novel form of creatine with a fancy story about absorption, for example, is how brands create a unique selling proposition, which then allows them to make sales in a competitive market and increase their margin by selling at a higher retail price, all based on the unsubstantiated claim that their form of creatine is somehow superior to creatine monohydrate. The take-home point is to save your money and stick with the trusty creatine monohydrate. The true evidence-based brands use this form of creatine. When selecting a creatine monohydrate, there are a few things to consider. The first is the supplier of the creatine, not the supplement brand, but who they source from. My preference for a supplier of creatine monohydrate is Creapure, which is the most well-studied high-quality creatine monohydrate produced by a German supplier. It is the creatine monohydrate that is used in the majority of peer-reviewed creatine studies. So first things first, I'm looking for Creapure on the label. But I also go a step further these days and look for an NSF certified creatine. There's been some recent controversy where brands selling creatine, especially creatine gummies, claim to have X grams of creatine per dose, but allegedly have skimped on their formulation and instead use other ingredients that are cheaper again than creatine to improve their margins. For this reason, I personally supplement with Momentous creatine monohydrate. They use the Creapure creatine monohydrate from Germany, and their product is also NSF certified for sport, which means it's third-party tested for purity, contaminants, etc. This is the third-party testing that is recommended by the NFL, NBA, PGA, Ironman, etc., and many other organizations that are seeking to mitigate the risks of contaminated dietary supplements. If it's good enough for professional athletes, it's good enough for me. So that's the type of creatine and my recommended brand, Momentous. But what about dose? Well, this really comes down to the benefit that you are personally chasing. The strongest evidence is for 3 to 5 grams per day or 0.1 grams per kilogram per day for building strength, muscle, and improving body composition. If, as we discussed earlier, you're wanting to experiment with high-dose creatine supplementation for cognition, it is important to remember that the first 5 or so grams of creatine that you consume per day is taken up by muscle. So you need to fill that tissue up first before creatine starts to go to other tissues like brain and bone. That's why the typical dose in studies looking at increasing brain creatine levels are 10 to 30 grams of creatine per day. And then there's the dose for improving cognition on specific days after sleep deprivation, which was 0.35 grams per kilogram. For someone like me that weighs around 90 kilograms, that's roughly 30 grams of creatine, quite a high dose. Personally, my regular dose of creatine is 10 grams per day, split over 2 5-gram servings with food. I find that I tolerate that best. Why 10 grams? Well, I weigh 90 kilograms, and so using the 0.1 grams per kilogram calculation, I get to 9 grams, and then I round that up to 10 grams to make it simple, with 1 scoop providing an even 5 grams. Like the subjects in the recent sleep deprivation study, you may well be perfectly fine with a high dose of creatine in a single serve. That is something that you would need to experiment with. If for whatever reason I personally have a poor night's sleep and I have an important day of cognitive tasks, I would try and split that 30-gram dose over 2 to 3 doses, again with food. If I had a history of concussions, high stress, depression, or Alzheimer's, I would strongly consider doubling my typical daily dose to 20 grams per day. As I mentioned earlier, there's not convincing data here yet, but there's a signal to suggest that when our brain health is compromised, brain creatine levels can decline and various aspects of cognition can be improved with high-dose creatine supplementation. Importantly, 20 to 30 grams per day taken ongoing has been shown to be safe, except for people with pre-existing kidney disease. If you're healthy, you need not worry about your kidneys or liver. And no, you also do not need to worry about creatine causing hair loss. That is not an adverse effect that's well supported by evidence at all, despite what you may read online. So to summarize, for me, creatine supplementation looks something like this. 10 grams of creatine per day, split across 2 5-gram servings, each with food to improve glycogen replenishment and decrease the chance of those gastrointestinal symptoms. To calculate this for yourself, use the 0.1 grams per kilogram of body weight formula. 30 grams of creatine on days where I have inadequate sleep and need my brain running on all cylinders, days when I'm in meetings, recording podcasts, etc. And if you're worried about fractures, the dose used to improve bone geometry was 0.14 grams per kilogram per day. And if you're someone who has acute or chronic brain damage, concussion, Alzheimer's, etc., it's thought that at least 20 grams per day is required to significantly increase brain creatine levels. Although I must emphasize again that more research is needed here to understand how creatine affects cognition within these contexts. Now, perhaps you're thinking, is this amount of creatine something that we can get from food? Do we really need to supplement? To give you an idea, here's how much food I would need to eat to get 10 grams of creatine per day, my typical daily dose. Over 2 kilograms of red meat per day, over 2.5 kilograms of chicken breast per day, over 3 kilograms of codfish per day, over 2 kilograms of salmon per day, over 2 kilograms of pork per day, or, and get this, 400 cups of cow's milk per day. So yeah, it would take a lot of food to get 5 to 10 grams of creatine per day, and you would likely consume far more calories than would be otherwise healthy. Personally, I'm going to stick to 10 grams of momentous creatine monohydrate. It is convenient, relatively inexpensive, and as I mentioned earlier, third-party tested for purity. A little while back, I recorded an episode diving into the health benefits around Bragg apple cider vinegar to review the science before endorsing a product that I've personally used for years. After that episode and a great chat with the Bragg team, here's what stood out. There is definitely some confusion online. Is Bragg still organic? Has it been pasteurized? The answer, it is not pasteurized. Bragg apple cider vinegar is 100% organic. It is raw, unfiltered, and naturally fermented with the live culture or mother in every bottle. In addition to being USDA organic certified, Bragg apple cider vinegar is non-GMO, project verified, kosher, B Corp certified, made in the USA, and free from added sugars, preservatives, or artificial colors. Fair to say, this little apple cider vinegar has plenty to brag about. Plus, there are real wellness benefits that come with its 750 milligrams of acetic acid per serving. Acetic acid has been proven to improve post-meal blood glucose by supporting glucose uptake, particularly in people who have elevated blood sugar. As I wrote about in my book, I'm a huge fan, and I mean huge fan, of a daily salad for long-term brain health. And for flavor and function, I recommend dressing it with Bragg apple cider vinegar, garlic, salt, pepper, Dijon mustard, and olive oil. Head to bragg.com and use the code Simon for 20% off your first order. That's bragg.com, promo code Simon.
With respect to B12, there's different types of that. There's methylcobalamin, and then there's cobalamin. Like, which one should you be selecting?
And hydroxycobalamin and adenosylcobalamin. It all gets very confusing. My position is that the most studied version is cyanocobalamin, and for preventing deficiency and reversing it. And therefore, the dosages that we have, the recommended amounts of B12 to take, are largely from studies looking at that type. So my recommendation is to buy a cyanocobalamin B12 supplement, and you'd be looking at 250 micrograms daily or 2,500 micrograms once a week. Those are your two options. Now, I should add to that, if you are a smoker or you have kidney disease, that's two instances where methylcobalamin is certainly better. And then I would also add, if your supplement contains methylcobalamin, I have worked with many people who have used that form and have completely fine B12 status. So they all seem to work. My preference being cyanocobalamin is purely because that's what most of the science has looked at.
Because it's more bioavailable, or it converts better?
Well, it tends to be used in the studies more because it's cheaper and more widely available. But we have seen it in the last, I'd say, 5 or so years, a lot more brands using methylcobalamin. And I think that's okay. My recommendation for most of this stuff is your laboratory tests will really tell the story. And that's a great objective way of keeping an eye on any of these nutrients, and just periodically keeping an eye on your overall health. I think it's a good idea. With B12, it's worth mentioning, if you're doing a blood test, the standard blood test that your physician would order is serum B12. And that's a pretty good marker, but it's not perfect. There are active and inactive B12 molecules in our body. And the serum B12 test does pick up some of the inactive analogs. And so the general rule of thumb is, if you get a serum B12 test and it comes back and you're at the middle or upper part of the range, then you probably don't need to look into things any further. But if you're more towards the lower end of the normal range, then there is another test called MMA that you can request, which is more specific and sensitive to active B12. So, most people won't need to worry about that, but that's one just to be mindful of if your B12 is a little low and perhaps you are subjectively feeling like you don't have a lot of energy.
Should I test homocysteine or methylmalonic acid if I'm vegan? I do think that both of these are worth testing at least once a year, mostly because serum B12 is not a very sensitive marker, because some of the B12 in our blood is inactive B12. If both homocysteine and methylmalonic acid, or MMA for short, are elevated, this is more specifically indicative of a low B12 status. High homocysteine is associated with cardiovascular disease, and high MMA is thought to contribute to neurological disease. In reality, however, if you're supplementing with B12 regularly at least 10 micrograms per day, but up to 250, your B12 status is probably fine. But if you're vegan, given you aren't getting B12 from food, I think it's worth adding these to your blood test. That way you can be absolutely sure that you're taking a good supplement and absorbing B12 efficiently. My recent blood test with Function Health, it included both homocysteine and MMA, and as shown on screen for those watching on YouTube, both of these are well within the healthy range.
And when we're talking about vitamin D, is there a difference between D and D3, or are those terms conflated?
Those
are
the same
thing?
D3 is the type of vitamin D that your body will produce following sun exposure. And it's also found in animal products and found in plant lichen, which is a type of algae. And then there is D2, which is found in mushrooms. But D2 or D3 will both increase your vitamin D status. It's important to add that 80-90% of your vitamin D status is determined by sun exposure. So very little contribution from the foods that we eat. And that status can be really affected by how dark your skin is, that where you live in the world. If you live at a northern latitude, you're more at risk of developing vitamin D deficiency.
What are the symptoms of? How does that manifest?
It could be an impaired immune system is one of the main ones, and so whether someone needs to supplement vitamin D is debated around the world heavily, and even the reference ranges are heavily debated country to country. My general sort of advice here is, unless you're getting daily sun exposure, and that sun exposure, the rule of thumb is about half of the time it would take for you to burn is the amount of time in the sun it would take to produce adequate amount of vitamin D.
Yeah, I mean, translation is the sun exposure required to produce an adequate amount of vitamin D is much more than I think people think.
Mm-hmm. And as I said, if you have darker skin pigmentation, you need to be in the sun for longer to produce the same amount of vitamin D as someone with fairer skin. And this is why we see people with darker skin more at risk of vitamin D deficiency. So you can do a hydroxy vitamin D test and determine whether you are low or you're at a healthy level. That could be your starting point. And so someone like you here in Los Angeles and myself in Sydney, sun exposure may be completely fine. It might be adequate for us. But then someone living in the United Kingdom or perhaps part of Canada, it could be a little different. Mm-hmm. And if you're on the low side, the general rule of thumb for supplementation is about 1,000 to 2,000 IU. And there are a few different vitamin D supplements out there, as I mentioned. So a lot of them are actually not plant-based. They're derived from wool. So if you are looking for one,
I didn't know that.
If you're looking for one that is vegan, if that's important to you, then you want to find either vitamin D3 from plant lichen, and essentially any brand selling vitamin D3 that is vegan will call out vegan on the packaging. Right. Or the other option is vitamin D2 from mushroom.
Is there a specific brand that you recommend? Or we're going to steer clear of that?
I generally do steer a little clear of recommending brands. However, I will say, because I'm asked this all the time, I have put together a PDF and I'm kind of nearly finished. It's been a huge project because trying to find the right supplements depending on someone's age or whether their lifestyle stage, for example, prenatal, and then looking what's available around the entire world. I can send you that PDF and you can perhaps put that on your website.
Yeah, maybe we can link that up in the show notes because this isn't going up for a while. So maybe by then you'll be done with it.
I will be done by then. But I have been reluctant to kind of associate with too many brands in the past, but it is such a regular question I get that I kind of thought, well, I need to go through this process. So that will definitely be made available. And I should just add to this that if someone is overweight or obese, their requirement for vitamin D is actually higher. So in that instance, it can require sort of 2,000 to 3,000 IU to achieve a healthy vitamin D status. So worth just keeping in mind.
2 questions. Is there any reason or efficacy behind like megadosing any of these? Like, is there a minimum effective dose and that you're, once you meet your requirements, you're good? Or is there any added benefit from taking over that amount is the first question. And then the second is, if you are deficient, how long does it take to restore your balance?
Is it?
I assume it's not just one, one vitamin and then you're good. Like it's going to take a while, right?
Yeah, weeks to months it can take, depending on the nutrient that we're talking about and how low someone is and what dose you give them. Mega dosing, look, I would not be recommending doing that unless it's under the guidance of your physician and there's a very compelling reason to be doing that. You hear all sorts of things and ideas online, like mega dosing vitamin D, for example. The upper limit of vitamin D is set at about 3,000 to 4,000 IU in Australia. And the sort of studies looking at toxicity have shown that up to 10,000 IU is still safe. However, I think given that the published upper limit is, I believe, 4,000 IU, I would be hesitant to recommend anyone does that mega dosing without their physician overlooking it.
You mentioned iodine earlier in this list of 8 nutrients. So why is that important, and what are the foods that we should be looking at to make sure that we're meeting our iodine needs?
Yeah, this one's often forgotten, and so it deserves a bit more airtime. So iodine is integral to our thyroid hormone production, which regulates our metabolism. And there are quite a few papers now that have shown pescatarians, vegetarians, and vegans tend to have lower iodine status. There are 3 ways to easily get iodine in your diet. You just need to be aware of them. And the first is seaweed. So dulse and wakame, nori sheets. These are loaded with iodine. And to give you an idea, the recommended daily intake of iodine is 150 micrograms. It's tiny. This is a trace mineral. You only need a tiny, tiny amount. And to reach that 150 micrograms, you would need about 2 teaspoons of dulse or wakame flakes or 1 nori sheet. There are different views of that as a strategy that I see out there, and usually that's pertaining to the fact that the iodine content of seaweed around the world does vary. So that's just something to keep in mind, and you can do a urinary iodine test if you wanted to check your status at any stage. The second option, and is an option where you would know you're definitely getting 150 micrograms, is iodized salt. And you would need, depending on the brand, it's usually about half a teaspoon of iodized salt would provide 150 micrograms. You really need to turn it around and read the label to determine that serve. Now, the sort of potential downside of that strategy is that comes with 1,000 milligrams of sodium, and the RDI of sodium is around 2,000. So it could be an okay strategy, let's say, for someone who's doing a lot of exercise and sweating and has healthy blood pressure. But for someone with even moderately raised blood pressure, or certainly someone with hypertension, then that's not going to be the best option for them.
Right.
I would add to that, and I just read about this a couple of weeks ago, and I'm super glad I read it. There was a big study in China that was published, it must have been about 5 or 6 months ago now, and it was actually done, it was a collaboration between a university in Sydney and some Chinese researchers, and they did this big randomized controlled trial looking at cardiovascular disease, specifically stroke in China. And what they were looking at was if you swap salt, traditional salt, out for what's called light salt, which instead of being completely sodium chloride, it's a potassium chloride, which gives you a very similar taste, but unlike sodium, potassium lowers blood pressure. And they did find that simple swapping to this what's called low salt or light salt, those are 2 brands that are available, which now do iodized salt, is a great option for someone who maybe does have moderately high blood pressure.
I never heard of that. Is that available?
It's available
outside of China?
Yes. So I wanted to make sure, I thought it could come up today. I wanted to make sure. So you can literally go online and search low salt or light salt. You'll find Amazon, all of the major retailers have it. I'm not sure what grocery supermarkets have it on the shelves here, but it's definitely available. And it reduces the sodium per serve by between 30 and 60%. So that's a sort of a good option for getting iodine into your diet if blood pressure is not an issue, is iodized salt. I think now, knowing the availability of low salt, that even if you have healthy blood pressure and you opt for an iodized salt, you may as well get the low salt
And
version.
it tastes the same.
Yes. Well,
or similar.
I read some reviews, and they were, the reviews sections are always quite entertaining, and there were some colorful messages in there. But the majority of people seem to think that it was similar and sort of like for like. So that's a potential option. The third option goes back to what you said earlier around, is just taking a multi-nutrient the best way to go. And you can get a single sort of isolated iodine supplement by itself, and that will provide 150 micrograms, or you'll find it in pretty much all multivitamins at that input level. And I should caveat, I guess, as well, now that I think about it, these numbers I'm talking about are for healthy adults. Some of this changes if you're pregnant or breastfeeding, for example. The amount of iodine you need bumps up to in the 200s. So just keep that in mind. But when you're working with a dietitian or physician, they'll be able to direct you into towards the correct dose.
And is iodine deficiency something that you're going to find more frequently on a plant-based diet versus an omnivorous diet?
Yes. So if you're not having dairy, which contains a little bit of iodine, and seafood, unless you're eating a lot of food with the iodized salt, you are more at risk of experiencing deficiency. So, certainly, and I kind of alluded to this at the start, this has been one of the nutrients that probably hasn't had enough airtime. And, you have those three options. I think they're pretty easy to plan for. So this doesn't need to be an issue. It's just being aware of it, realizing you only need a trace. It's a very small amount you need, and just working out what option are you going for, 1, 2, 3, and then set and forget.
A common fear that a lot of people have when considering a plant-based diet is calcium. Oh my goodness, if I don't eat dairy, I'm not drinking milk, my bones are going to turn brittle. Where am I going to get my calcium? My understanding is that dark leafy greens are a pretty good source of calcium. I've never had an issue with this, but how do you think about that and ensuring that people are meeting their calcium needs?
Firstly, I would say that building strong bones is a team game. We've reduced it very much to just calcium, but it's so much more than that. And even before talking about nutrition, I think it's worth emphasizing that exercise is arguably far, far more important. Both impact exercise, so we're talking about jogging or skipping, going up and down stairs or hopping, that sort of impact exercise is a stimulus. The body structure reflects function.
Yeah.
And so it responds to that by laying down more bone, increasing your bone mineral density. And then the second type of exercise, resistance training. So be it lower body, things like squats, or upper body with bands. The research is pretty clear that we need to be doing this stuff regularly for as long as possible to prevent significant amount of bone loss, which does naturally occur as you age, but you want to slow that down.
Yeah, there's some interesting studies out there about lack of bone density or bone loss in elite cyclists because there's no impact. Despite the fact that they're incredibly fit,
yes,
there's an issue with that.
And that's a great point. So cycling and swimming are incredible from a cardiovascular point of view, but they're not loading the bone in the same way. So it's not really about either or. You want to
be working both cardiovascular exercise as well as this impact resistance training. And there is a lot of studies showing, for example, with osteopenia or osteoporosis, osteopenia being kind of like pre-diabetes is to type 2 diabetes. You first
osteopenia being a precursor to osteoporosis.
You sort of go through that phase usually first, but there is a lot of research looking at this, and it's clear that just walking, for example, is not enough to prevent that bone loss and to prevent getting to a point where you have an osteoporotic fracture. And 1 in 2 people in this country and in Australia aged over 50 will have an osteoporotic fracture. So this is an incredibly important conversation. So to the start of this, and to answer your question more directly, calcium is important, and the recommended daily intake around the world, it varies country to country. Again, it's another one where people really haven't settled on a kind of universal figure. The World Health Organization start at 500 milligrams a day. The United Kingdom is about 700 milligrams a day. And then there are other countries like Australia and the United States where it's between 1,000 and 1,300 milligrams per day. And I was really interested in kind of understanding the data and why there is confusion. And what I landed on was consistently it seems that you need to be consuming at least 700 milligrams, which is in line with the United Kingdom recommendations, as a way of preventing the development of osteopenia or osteoporosis. And what I can tell you is that when you look across all of the different population studies looking at vegetarian and vegan cohorts, they are consistently getting that much calcium on average. So on average, they're getting that. But whenever you look at an average, we need to be aware that there are going to be people falling below. So it is still something to be aware of. And you're right, these foods like dark leafy greens, and also your cruciferous vegetables like broccoli, but also seeds like sesame seeds and tahini. These are very, very rich in calcium. My recommendation is to add a plant-based milk to your diet that has calcium in it.
Fortified with calcium. And in my experience working with a lot of people, this is a nice way to sort of bulletproof the diet and ensure that you're getting over 700 milligrams. And my general advice is to look for a plant-based milk that has at least 100 milligrams of calcium per 150 mils. And what that means is when you have a cup or a cup and a half, you'll be getting 400 milligrams of calcium. And by the time you've had all of your fruits and vegetables and legumes and nuts and seeds, you're well above the 700 milligram sort of threshold where we want to be. But as I kind of alluded to, this is a team game, and you can have as much calcium in your diet as you want and still develop osteoporosis. And we know that because countries that drink the most milk have the highest rates of osteoporosis. So what is that attributable to?
So it speaks to the fact that it is a team game. And we do see that countries that are consuming the most dairy also have the lowest vitamin D status, or tend to. And vitamin D is crucial for bone mineral density because it actually enhances the absorption of calcium in your diet. So if you're deficient in vitamin D, you will absorb less calcium. So building strong bones, you need to make sure you're across vitamin D. You are hitting this calcium threshold, but then also vitamin B12, which we spoke about, integral, and protein. And if you're covering all of those bases and you are doing the exercise, then that is all going to sort of coalesce to really reduce your risk of developing, quote unquote, weak bones.
Right. So load-bearing exercise, vitamin D, and calcium all work in tandem.
And I mentioned protein, and this is partly why the
recommendations for protein as someone gets to sort of 50, 60 goes up a little bit. And this is mostly to do with trying to slow down this rate of bone mineral density loss, but also to slow down the rate of muscle loss. Listen up. From this moment forward, I want you to treat your body like you're training for the Olympics. Yes, you are an Olympic athlete in the making. And that starts with being intentional about your supplements. As a future Olympian, you need to know what's in your supplements, what's not, and what certifications back that up so you can trust that they'll deliver. That's why I use Momentous, especially their upgraded 100% plant protein. It's absolutely delicious, and it's made from US and Canadian pea and rice protein with 0 fillers, no artificial ingredients, and it's completely allergen free. Unlike a lot of plant proteins, the taste is genuinely smooth, but what really sets it apart is testing. Every batch is NSF certified for sport, screened for heavy metals, banned substances, and label accuracy to meet Olympic level standards. Don't wait, start treating yourself like an Olympian by going to livemomentous.com and using the code LIVINGPROOF for 35% off your first subscription order. That's livemomentous.com, code LIVINGPROOF to fuel those gold medal gains. How do you feel about prebiotic supplements? Because that's a big category now. And if someone's in the kind of grocery store or supplement store, they're faced with a lot of different options. So do you have any advice, or do you recommend a prebiotic supplement in this context of taking a course of antibiotics? And how could someone kind of navigate that to choose one that's going to be most beneficial?
I have had great experience with the use of prebiotic fiber supplements within this context, and also with people who have other digestive health issues, such as irritable bowel syndrome, whether it be constipation or diarrhea predominant. I've had great success using prebiotic fiber supplements in that space. Now, let's drill down on what to look for in a prebiotic, what you want. What you don't want is something that, well, first of all, it has to be prebiotic, right? So not all forms of fiber actually are prebiotic. So it needs to be demonstrated in a study to actually impact the microbiome and to have health benefits. So it has to be prebiotic. Number 2, taking massive doses of a monofiber is not the approach for winning. Because again, and I mentioned this a moment ago, the evidence suggests that there's a certain amount of benefit that you will get once you cross a threshold, and then it's time to move on to something else, because you're not going to get more benefits from hammering and pounding the exact same thing more. You just, more does not translate into more in this case. You get what you get. It's time to move on. So I don't recommend that people like pound monofibers and take 10, 15 grams of whatever it may be.
When you say pound of monofiber, are we talking like a straight up inulin or something?
Yeah, exactly. And the issue, and I think inulin is bringing up a good point, because inulin is prebiotic, but the issue is inulin also is extremely gas producing. That's because inulin is literally the definition of a fructan, which is a FODMAP. So one of the things that you can do if you want to be smart about this is think about the fact that you literally are in a state of dysbiosis. Again, you have medically induced a dysbiosis. We want to restore eubiosis. But when you have a damaged gut, you are far more likely to suffer symptoms as a result of adding fiber to your diet. So the way that we can approach this, Simon, is to choose low FODMAP forms of prebiotics. Low FODMAP forms of prebiotics are ultimately going to achieve the effect that we're looking for, support the microbes, give us the health benefits, restore the gut barrier. This is what we want, but the difference being that you don't have to feel miserable and gassy and bloated and all of those things because you just added this prebiotic supplement.
Right. So how does someone navigate that? Do they need to understand which ingredients are low FODMAP and not, or are they looking for low FODMAP? It would be clearly called out on the label. It's
not necessarily likely to be clearly called out. Part of this is understanding the individual types of fiber that exist and which ones are high FODMAP versus low FODMAP. I mentioned that inulin is high FODMAP. Acacia powder or partially hydrolyzed guar gum are examples of fibers that are low FODMAP. Those are options. Okay, now the issue here is, again, those are monofibers. It's just one form of fiber. If we want something better, we want a blend. We want a mix. We want to be hitting multiple thresholds. And we also shouldn't just think about fiber, because fiber isn't the only prebiotic. There are different types of prebiotics. Resistant starches are prebiotics. Polyphenols are prebiotics. The way that this works is when you eat a meal, most of what you consume is digested and absorbed and broken down in your small intestine. But there are these parts that will arrive into your colon intact the same way that they were when you entered your stomach. And these are the prebiotics: fiber, resistant starches, and polyphenols. Each of them, in their own unique way, has the ability to impact your microbiome, to support the beneficial gut bugs, and to achieve health benefits for you. In the last episode that I was on, I mentioned that I'm starting a supplement company. And the intent of that supplement company, called 38 Terra, is to take gut health supplements to a level that's never been seen before.
Which stands for 38 trillion.
38 Terra stands for 38 trillion, because we have 38 trillion microbes. And this company, we are focused on the gut. We believe that health benefits come from supporting and nurturing the gut, whether you are sick or not sick, or you just took antibiotics. I believe that the key in this case is to support the gut, because when you do that, there are downstream benefits throughout the entire body. So we're talking about, like, what is the preferable prebiotic supplement? And I mentioned, like, we want to get as many different microbes as possible, and we want different types of prebiotics: fiber, resistant starch, and polyphenols. And that is exactly what our first product, called Daily Microbiome Nutrition, is. It wasn't developed specifically for the purpose of being used after antibiotics. It was developed to support a person who has a damaged gut and allow them to restore their gut. It was also developed for the person who does not currently have gut issues and wants to continue to have a healthy gut and wants to support and elevate their gut microbes as much as possible. But when you think about, like, what we're looking for after antibiotics, this checks all the boxes, because we have 7 different unique plants. We have all 3 forms of prebiotics being represented: fiber, resistant starches, and polyphenols, that give you exactly what you're looking for. And by the way, the fiber that was selected and used in this product, Daily Microbiome Nutrition, again, like, this was developed with people with gut issues in mind, but it's for everyone. And these fibers are low FODMAP. So you don't need to worry about that issue.
I'm looking forward to getting my hands on that, swapping out that one that I showed you before.
Well, the cool thing about it is that, like, we were talking about having a healthy gut before taking the antibiotics, during the antibiotics, after the antibiotics. And that's this product is designed to help you to have a healthy gut, used on a daily basis to ensure that your gut bugs are getting the nutrition that they need.
Right. So you take that once a day.
You take that once a day. You take that once a day. Now, for some people may want to, I feel like this is a different conversation. There are some people that may want to amp that up to twice a day, but for the vast majority of people, once a day is all you need.
But people can go to 38terra.com if they want to read more about that.
38terra.com is where you can read more and check it out.
Okay. So polyphenols, resistant starch, prebiotic fiber, all in that one blend.
All in that one blend. 7 plants, 3 forms of prebiotics, 1 bioactive supplement that is so easily taken once a day. You literally just take a scoop, stir some water, and you drink it, and it tastes delicious.
Every time I hear resistant starch, I think about cooked and cooled potatoes, which I think you shared with us once in a previous episode, and green bananas.
Yeah, those are sort of the classic places that you can get resistant starch from. But what's interesting about the resistant starch that you'll find in this product specifically is that it's been clinically tested in humans, and we're using the dose that was used in the clinical trial, which is, I think, a unique thing when it comes to supplements. Many supplements will make claims without actually using the effective dose that was demonstrated in a randomized controlled trial to actually achieve the effect. And so this is just one of the ingredients within daily microbiome nutrition. But with the resistant starch from the potatoes, you're getting resistant starch type 2. And what they found in this human clinical trial is that over the course of 4 weeks, people are increasing 2 specific types of bacteria that basically every single one of us, we want more of. One was Akkermansia. Akkermansia is associated with our metabolism and also our immune system. And they increased Akkermansia by 317% using this type of resistant starch for 4 weeks, once a day at the dose that's in daily microbiome nutrition. And they increased the bifidobacteria, which, by the way, bifidobacteria are the friendly bacteria that you find in many probiotics. And they are also the friendly bacteria that people grow when they breastfeed. But they're beneficial throughout life. And they increased the bifidobacteria 350%. Again, it's the exact dose that you will find in this product.
I think there might be some people listening that are thinking, is this product something that kids can take and pregnant women take? I'm assuming this is just a food product based on food ingredients. So is it safe for everyone to take?
I see no reason that a child or a pregnant woman would not be able to take this product. It's dairy free. It's keto friendly. It's paleo. It's vegan. So, in all those set cases, it seems okay. I think that the one thing that I would say is you should always, whether it's this product or something else, you should always talk to your doctor about it.
Yeah. Anytime you kind of add something to your regime. What is it that makes me think that omega-3 supplementation and having a higher omega-3 index in the ballpark of 8 to 12% will lower risk of cardiovascular disease and mortality? Well, a few different lines of evidence. Firstly, we have data from a randomized controlled trial, the VITAL study, showing reduced risk of cardiovascular disease, the study's primary outcome, in healthy subjects who rarely consumed fish at baseline, supplementing with 840 milligrams of combined DHA and EPA per day. Second, large long-term population studies suggest that having a higher omega-3 index of 8 to 12% relative to a low omega-3 index of less than 4% is associated with 30% lower risk of suffering fatal coronary heart disease and approximately 12 to 15% lower risk of death from any cause. One bit of pushback that I foresee here is that the results of these observational studies may in fact be affected by confounding variables. That is to say that people who eat more fish may be healthier because there are also people who smoke less, exercise more, eat more fruits and vegetables, etc. Maybe they have less risk because they're health-seeking folks, not because they have a high omega-3 index. Just last week, I hopped on another call with previous guest Dr. Bill Harris, an internationally recognized expert on omega-3 fatty acids, and asked him what he thought about this.
There have been very few, and I think only one that I can think of, study that's been in people without heart disease, primary prevention, with omega-3 versus a placebo, and that's the VITAL study. And they found, despite they're saying there was no benefit of omega-3, that's because they were looking at a composite endpoint of 3 or 4 different cardiovascular events all pooled together. And what they saw was no difference in the composite, but if you look at the individual components of the composite, the people that got omega-3 had statistically significant less risk for having heart attacks and for dying from heart attacks. So those were, and people who were reported low fish intake in that study, if you look at the effects of omega-3 in the group that reported low fish intake, they were statistically significant benefits on their composite primary endpoint. So to say there's no good evidence from primary prevention for omega-3 is not true. People are asking for levels of evidence for that. I think they forget that we're talking about a nutrient that has essentially no side effect, virtually no downside, except for this one thing with AFib, which has popped up now and kind of muddied the waters. Anyway, people can talk about primary versus secondary endpoints, and if they want to throw all the secondary endpoints out, then they're not looking at the overall picture of the science.
I also asked Dr. Harris what his thoughts were on the risk of atrial fibrillation, stroke, and omega-3 supplementation.
I think that paper is misrepresented the real situation, frankly. It's a complicated paper. It's one of 18 papers that have been done looking at fish oil supplement use in the UK Biobank and some health outcome. Interestingly, the authors of this particular paper, which is on cardiovascular disease, I think should have, in their discussion, talked about, there's 17 other papers that have looked at fish oil supplement use in different diseases. One of them in cardiovascular disease, and they got a completely different answer in the cardiovascular paper. And they didn't discuss these things at all because in those other 17 papers, I think there were 25 statistically significant associations between fish oil use, reported fish oil use, and some disease outcome. 25 different significant effects. One of them was adverse, which was AFib, and 24 of them were positive, were favorable. So let's look at the whole picture. If we're going to be dissing fish oil supplements because of one small outcome, and actually that outcome, the AFib, the difference in risk was 0.6%, meaning the people who are not taking fish oil supplements had something like 4% chance of developing AFib over the follow-up period. The people on supplements had like 4.6% chance of. So it's a very small difference. It can be magnified by using relative risk instead of absolute risk, which is what they did, which is what we do too. I mean, all of us do that. It's just the way you play the game. But it should have been contextualized, I think, a lot better. The increased risk for AFib is 1%. If you take the supplements, you might be 1% more likely to develop AFib. And then once you've got the AFib, you're better off than taking the fish oil than if you weren't. And the thing about stroke was not statistically significant in that study. They put it in the abstract, they put it in the paper, but they define statistically significant as a p less than 0.05. And if you look at the table, the p-value for stroke was not less than 0.05. It was 0.05. So we would say, a trend almost, but it certainly shouldn't have made the final conclusions that increased risk for stroke because it wasn't significant.
The next question you probably have is, how much DHA and EPA do I need to consume every day, be it from food or supplements, to get to an omega-3 index of 8 to 12%? It's going to be difficult, if not impossible, albeit for genetic outliers, to get to an optimal omega-3 index unless you eat fish or supplement with DHA and EPA. How much you need to get to an omega-3 index of 8 to 12% will depend on a variety of factors. In particular, your genetics, body weight, diet, and your baseline omega-3 index. If your baseline omega-3 index is 4 to 5%, where the average person eating a typical omnivorous diet sits, studies conducted on humans suggest that you'll need about 1 to 1.5 grams of DHA and EPA per day to get to 8%. This can be achieved with food alone, supplementation alone, or a combination of the two. Starting with nutrition, the major source of DHA and EPA in human diets is seafood, specifically fatty fish like sardines, anchovies, mackerel, and salmon. So how much fish would one need to eat to average 1 gram of DHA and EPA per day, the lower end of the recommended range that I just mentioned? To help us answer this, I have a table that I sourced from OmegaQuant. There's too much data in this table, which is on screen for those watching on YouTube and in the show notes for those listening along on audio to go over the entire thing. But here's a few key takeaways that will be relevant to people who eat seafood. Firstly, to average 1 gram of DHA and EPA per day, one would need to consume about a small serving, 3 ounces or 85 grams, of salmon per day, or a larger serving, 6 ounces or 170 grams, every other day. It's worth noting that there is some variation in the DHA and EPA content of different types of salmon, with wild Atlantic salmon containing the most. It's also typically the most expensive type of salmon, but because you need less of it to get the same amount of DHA and EPA, it's not as expensive as a first glance may suggest. Second, herring. Both Pacific and Atlantic are the most DHA and EPA rich of the fatty fish. 4 small servings a week, 3 ounces or 85 grams, would get you pretty close to 1 grams of DHA and EPA per day. Lastly, sardines. You need to have about 100 grams or 3.5 ounces of sardines per day to get close to the 1 gram of DHA and EPA per day recommendation. Remember, this is just to get to 1 gram of DHA and EPA per day. Some people will need more than that to get to an omega-3 index of 8%. It's safe to say not many people eat this much fish, or quite frankly, would want to. At this point, you may be wondering, how on earth would humans have ever eaten this volume of fish? That's a good question. The likely answer is that outside of Arctic populations, they probably didn't. But these ancestors of ours were really not living long enough to worry about that. They ate to survive, and a suboptimal omega-3 index isn't going to kill someone before they get to an age to procreate. That's all evolution cares about. Here today, we're talking about optimizing for health span and longevity, keeping our heart and our brain in good condition when we're old and wrinkly and want to enjoy time with our grandkids. Something that is a privilege in a day and age where we rarely need to worry about predators, life-threatening infections, famine, etc. In short, our ancestors, except those from the Arctic, probably didn't consume much fish. However, that doesn't mean a higher omega-3 intake wouldn't have been beneficial for them, especially if they reached old age. This insight leads us to an important question. How can we, in our modern world, optimize our omega-3 levels? The obvious answer might seem to be eat more fish. But here's where we encounter a significant challenge. Our world today faces severe environmental issues, including heavy metal contamination in our waterways and rapidly dwindling fish stocks. Advocating for increased fish consumption on a global scale could lead to negative health consequences from heavy metal exposure and fairly catastrophic environmental consequences affecting today's coastal communities that rely on fish as protein and future generations of humans across the world. I'll explore these environmental health concerns in depth in a future video with an expert. So if eating more fish isn't the answer, what is? Let's shift our focus to a more sustainable and practical approach: testing and thoughtful supplementation. Imagine your body's omega-3 level as a fuel gauge. Just as you wouldn't try to fill up your car without checking the fuel level first, it's important to understand your current omega-3 status before making changes. That's where testing comes in. By measuring your omega-3 levels with an omega-3 index test, we establish a baseline that allows us to tailor our approach to your specific needs. Once we know your baseline omega-3 index level, we can explore the various supplementation options. My omega-3 supplement strategy is as follows. It seems sensible to supplement with the minimum dosage of DHA and EPA per day to get us to an optimal omega-3 index, so we can optimize for long-term health benefits, minimize adverse effects like atrial fibrillation, and save some pennies along the way. For most people, that's going to be in the ballpark of 1 to 1.5 grams of active DHA and EPA per day. I've personally done this, supplementing with about 1.5 grams of DHA and EPA per day, and over around 9 months, I saw my omega-3 index go from 5.76% to 9.44%. Now that I'm above 8%, I'm actually going to slightly reduce my dose to approximately 1 gram of DHA and EPA per day, and then retest 4 months after making that change to see if I'm still above 8% with that slightly lower dose. Why 4 months? Well, the omega-3 index is based on the fatty acid composition of red blood cells, and red blood cells take about 4 months to turn over. So if you change your diet or supplement protocol, wait at least 4 months before you retest your omega-3 index. Omega Quant, who I have zero affiliation with but highly recommend for omega-3 index testing, actually has a dosing calculator on their website, which suggests that someone like me could get to 8% with around 810 milligrams of DHA and EPA per day. If I could achieve that, I'd be very happy. You might be thinking, why 8%? Why not 12%? This is something that I asked Dr. Harris. Are there continued benefits up for grabs going up above 8% to 12% and beyond?
In practical terms, it's far more important to just at least get to 8%. So few people are at 8% that to try to worry about being at 12% is almost a fool's errand. We haven't got very much data on large groups of people with omega-3 levels at 10, 11, 12%. There just aren't that many people like that. So we really don't know. That's kind of why our limit is say 8 to 12, and above 12, we just don't know. We're not going to make any promises. There is some evidence, though, from Japan that people that were at 11% omega-3 index compared to those at 8%, they had a lower risk of, I think, myocardial infarction. So in Japan, you can do things like that. You can look at those sort of levels. So that was some evidence, and there was a paper recently, or not recently, but a few years ago, that pointed that there might be even additional benefits above 8% for cardiovascular. But I think that's still yet to be really studied well.
When choosing off-the-shelf supplements, I recommend opting for brands that have gone through third-party testing for purity, oxidation, and contamination. I've managed to get this information from third-party testing that I've paid to access from organizations like consumerlab.com or directly from the brands themselves, providing they were happy to make their third-party testing reports available. I've also ensured that the brands that I recommend contain DHA and EPA, not just DHA, because as I mentioned earlier, there is mechanistic evidence that suggests EPA may be more important for stabilizing existing plaque that we have in our arteries. Shout out to previous guest and friend, Dr. Alan Flanagan, for bringing that to my attention. Please note, I said the target range for most people should be 1 to 1.5 grams of active DHA and EPA per day. When you read omega-3 supplement labels, be careful not to look at the total oil per serve, but rather the total amount of DHA and EPA. It's the latter that should add to 1 to 1.5 grams per day. There can be other oils in the capsule, hence it's important to only pay attention to the DHA and EPA content. Based on all of this criteria, the brands that I recommend to help you optimize your omega-3 index are as follows. Starting with algae oil, because it's more sustainable than fish oil, and quite frankly, I'd love it if everyone adopted an algae oil where possible mindset here. 3 capsules per day of either the omega-3 algae oil or Emil's Optimal Omega Plus. At the time of this video, Costco has a very good deal on the omega-3 algae oil for those based in America. $29.99 for a 2-month supply. I'm actually shocked by how cheap this is. It's cheaper than almost all high quality fish oils that I've been able to find. Algae is the original source of DHA and EPA, the omega-3s that eventually make their way up the food chain and are found in fish. By going straight to the source, we can obtain these vital nutrients without the concerns associated with overfishing or contaminants found in some fish. It really is a win-win, effective for our health and friendly to our environment. And contrary to views that you may encounter on social media, algae oil has indeed been shown in clinical studies to reliably raise someone's omega-3 index to an optimal level. I asked Dr. Harris if there was any difference between the effectiveness of algae oil and fish oil, and here's what he had to say.
In terms of being absorbed and getting into tissues, yeah, it's absolutely as well absorbed and as well distributed in the body.
If you cannot get omega-3 in your location or aren't a member of Costco and price is an issue, or for whatever reason you would prefer fish oil, I personally haven't come across any other reasons than price, my recommendation would be Carlson's Maximum Omega 2000. 2 capsules per day will give you a little under 2 grams of combined DHA and EPA, so you'll likely only need to take this 4 times per week. An alternative to this is Garden of Life's doctor-formulated Advanced Omega. 1 serving per day provides 1.3 grams of combined DHA and EPA. Dr. Bill Harris recommends a re-esterified triglyceride form of fish oil. He has his own brand, Parasol Nutrition, which provides 1,400 milligrams of DHA and EPA in a 2-capsule dose. This is what Bill personally takes each day. At $69.95 for a 3-month supply, it's more cost-effective than Carlson's Maximum Omega, but surprisingly more expensive than the omega-3 algae oil at Costco. I say surprisingly because usually algae oil is more expensive than fish oil, but that is not the case here. Foreseeing there will be comments, if Dr. Harris sells omega-3 supplements, he must be biased. Could be. Or it could be that he's so convinced by the evidence for supplementing omega-3s that he wanted to produce a high-quality supplement. His positions seem logically consistent, at least to me anyway, so I'm of the belief it's the latter. Whether you're training hard or simply aiming to feel your best every day, IM8 Daily Ultimate Essentials has you covered. It's the daily multi-nutrient that I've recently switched to and now recommend. With 92 bioavailable nutrients, including vitamin B12, vitamin D, iodine, choline, K2, CoQ10 for heart health, and MSM for joint recovery. It is NSF certified for sport. It ships to over 30 countries, including the United States, Canada, the UK, Australia, and New Zealand, and works with both plant-based and omnivorous diets. I've used several multi-nutrients over the years, but IM8's clean formulation and commitment to science and clinical validation really stood out. So much so that I've joined their scientific advisory board alongside Dr. David Katz and Dr. Suzanne Devkota, two previous guests of The Proof. For listeners of The Proof, IM8 is offering 10% off your first daily Ultimate Essentials order with the code SIMON at checkout. Just head to im8health.com. That's IM, the number 8, HEALTH.com, and use promo code SIMON to get started.
If folks are not eating seafood for ethical or environmental reasons and or taste, and they would rather take a supplement, again, is the target that 1 gram a day of DHA and EPA? And when you're looking at that supplement on shelf, do you need to consider the amount of EPA and DHA, because that often differs between brands?
Yeah. So I've come to 1 gram a day, and that is, that's my, if you like, my unofficial recommendation. But that's the sort of number that, I would normally be thinking of. It's higher than, most recommendations that are out there from governmental bodies, but I think, they're a bit modest. So if that's the sort of intake I'm recommending from fish, then obviously I need to be recommending that from a supplement, if that's what people are choosing to do. So you have to look at the EPA and DHA content of any supplement that you might be choosing. I think, you're helped if you look for a concentrate. So is it 45% EPA and DHA? Is it 60% EPA and DHA? Something like that. Because most standard fish oils, particularly, cheaper, less expensive ones you might see, maybe they only contain 30% EPA and DHA. So 70% of what's in the capsule is not omega-3s, and you're not interested in that. So I would look for concentrates and make sure, you might have to take a couple of supplements a day to get up to my level of 1 gram. But I would really focus on EPA and DHA content of a supplement if that's the route people are going down.
Let's say someone's regularly eating fatty fish, or they're doing the DHA EPA supplementation protocol that you've just outlined, but they have very little ALA in their diet. Is ALA inherently important, and does it have any sort of biological functions that require us to consume it, even within the context of someone who is getting enough direct source of DHA and EPA and therefore doesn't need to worry about ALA converting to those longer chain omega-3s?
Yeah, that is a really good question, Simon. So I think, so it's been really hard to ascribe biological actions to alpha-linolenic acid, and most people consider that its role is to support this conversion that I talked about right at the beginning of the show. So its role is actually acting as a precursor of EPA and DHA. Having said that, there are chemical mediators that are produced from alpha-linolenic acid that seem to have biological action, just like there are chemical mediators produced from EPA and DHA that have biological action. So it might be that some actions of alpha-linolenic acid emerge, but right now its main functionality is well, maybe it has two functionalities. One is as a precursor to EPA and DHA, but also attempting to limit linoleic acid conversion. In the same way that I mentioned linoleic acid limited alpha-linolenic acid conversion. But I think, the statement that people who are consuming a high level of EPA and DHA either through fish or through supplements have a lower need for alpha-linolenic acid, I would support that statement for sure. But we mustn't forget, that omega-6s limit the action of omega-3s. So as well as these strategies, we want to look at sources of linoleic acid as well.
So we're in the supplement store and we're looking for an EPA DHA supplement. I think if I recall correctly, in my conversation with Bill, we spoke about different forms of these fatty acids. So there's the triglyceride phospholipid form, which is how these would come in food, in fatty fish. And then there's an ethyl ester form. Do you have a view on what form would be better absorbed or more effective, or what someone should look out for on the bottle?
Yeah. So, as far as I'm aware, most supplements will be either the triglyceride or phospholipid form. It is possible that there are supplements of ethyl esters. Now, all of these forms have to be digested, okay, to make the fatty acids available to us. And it's really important, and I don't know if Bill mentioned this, but it's really important that people take their supplements at the same time as they have a meal, because when you eat a meal, you induce all the digestive actions. And there's pretty good evidence that if people take supplements, and that includes ethyl esters and triglycerides, without a meal, you limit the availability. So whatever supplement people are using, they should take it either with or around the time of a meal. There is some evidence that ethyl esters are less well absorbed than triglycerides and phospholipids. Some people say the phospholipids are the best absorbed. I think in healthy people taking supplements with a meal, it's not going to make a lot of difference, the chemical form.
And ultimately, if you do measure your omega-3 status, which is why I think it's a good idea to do, and I think the test that I got was about $40. So it's a cost, but it's not incredibly inaccessible to many people, is that you can go away, implement whatever protocol it is, whether it's eating fatty fish or a new supplement, and then retest. And to my understanding, you would want to wait sort of 3 to 4 months before you retest. That's right?
Yeah, I would agree completely. So I think I sort of made this point before, that people could have a test, decide on a strategy, adopt that strategy, and they could retest. And I think you're dead right. I would wait 3 or 4 months, making sure I adhere to whatever my strategy is, and then retest. And that 3 or 4 months is all about the timing that it takes for omega-3s to go up, particularly in red blood cells, which is a good marker of tissue levels.
Another question that I think people may have here is how to store DHA and EPA supplements. There's a lot of talk about these polyunsaturated fats being unstable and not exposing them to heat. Should these be stored, in your view, in the cupboard in ambient sort of temperatures or in the fridge?
Yeah. I'm not, to be honest, I'm not an expert on the storage effects, but I think you're right. These are potentially unstable fatty acids, and therefore I would store them not in a hot place, and I would store them away from light. So I think they're going to last better if you put them in a reasonably cool cupboard. I wouldn't store them in the fridge. I don't see any need for that. But I wouldn't store them in a really hot place in sunlight either.
And would algae oil be just as effective as fish oil if someone's considering that?
Yeah. So what we haven't talked about, Simon, is whether EPA and DHA are different from one another. And they have their own biological actions. And DHA, I think I mentioned in passing, is very, very important for brain development and visual development. So DHA is super important early in life. You could argue that pre-pregnancy and in pregnancy, a woman might think about a supplement which is richer in DHA than EPA, and there are some DHA algal oils out there. I think outside of pregnancy and early life, both of them are important. So I would look at a supplement that contained either both EPA and DHA. That isn't to say, so there are some algal oils which are mainly DHA. They're also effective at raising, obviously, omega-3 status in the blood. They lower triglycerides and all of those things. And I think one of the joys of algal-based supplements, of course, is they can be used by vegetarians, vegans, without concern. They're also, they're not fish sourced, which, some people might worry about from a sustainability point of view, as we mentioned. So I think there are benefits of, benefits of algal oils. They have the same benefits biologically, but there are some acceptability aspects of algal oils that standard fish oils don't have.
What about DPA? I know that's another long chain omega-3 that gets a lot less airtime. And I have seen a few different brands promoting the fact that their formula also contains DPA. Is a formula that contains DPA superior in any way to a formula that just contains DHA and EPA, all other things equal?
Yep, that's a great question. So we've talked about the pathway, alpha-linolenic acid to EPA, and then I mentioned going to DHA. But in between EPA and DHA in that pathway is DPA, docosapentaenoic acid. That has 22 carbons and 5 double bonds. So it's on the pathway. Undoubtedly, DPA has biological actions, but DPA is way understudied compared to EPA and DHA. There are, I think, a small number of human studies of DPA. I think whether it offers any superiority over EPA and DHA, I think it's too early to say. But, you've got DPA in your blood, you've got DPA in your cells, and there is DPA probably in most omega-3 supplements, but there will be some supplements that are richer than others. But I think I don't think anyone would be in a position to say DPA has a particular superiority because that isn't yet known.
Right. And if your supplement contains EPA, what you're saying is that EPA will act as a precursor to DPA?
It does, yes. So if you give people pure EPA supplement, which we have done, you get higher EPA in people's blood, but you also get the build-up of DPA as well.
Final thing on your list of 8 nutrients is zinc.
Mm-hmm.
We're hearing a lot about zinc lately.
Mm-hmm.
We're being told that we should be making sure that we're on top of our zinc for COVID purposes. So I assume, without knowing, that there's some link between zinc and immune system function.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. Very important for immunity, for hair, skin, nail health, for energy production, preventing DNA damage. It's a crucial mineral, and you're going to find it mostly in nuts and legumes, are kind of like and seeds, hemp seeds, for example, packed with zinc. But cashews, another great one, pretty easy to get as long as you're regularly eating
nuts and seeds and legumes, which anyone who is adopting a whole food plant-based diet will be, you'll have no problems reaching the sort of adequate intake for that. Is there a new study that you found particularly interesting? Yes, actually, a study titled Dietary Adaptation of Non-Heme Iron Absorption in Vegans, a Controlled Trial. So this study looked at how well vegans versus omnivores absorb non-heme iron, the type of iron found in plant foods. Essentially, can vegans absorb iron from plants as well as meat eaters? Researchers gave a small group of healthy young adults, they were aged between 18 to 30, 150 grams of pistachios, which contain non-heme iron, and measured how their blood iron levels changed over the next 4 hours. Surprisingly, vegans absorbed more iron from the pistachios than omnivores did. Vegans had significantly higher rise in blood iron levels. Their bodies seemed to be better adapted to absorbing plant-based iron. This appears to be due to lower hepcidin levels in vegans, a hormone that blocks iron absorption when iron stores are high, and possibly lower baseline iron levels, which can increase absorption. So what does this mean? Well, vegans may develop natural adaptations that help them absorb plant iron more efficiently. Despite plant iron being less bioavailable on paper, the body seems to adjust over time on a vegan diet. This study and its results challenge the assumption that all vegans are at a higher risk of iron deficiency. It also challenges the idea that we can look at non-heme iron absorption in short-term studies of omnivores as a way of analyzing iron absorption in everyone. It seems that adopting a vegan diet habitually over the long term results in adaptations that dial up iron absorption. Vegans do tend to have lower iron stores, but the evidence looking at iron levels in the blood is mixed, with some studies suggesting vegans are at higher risk of deficiency and others suggesting they aren't. I'm showing my latest iron labs on screen now. All of my results are healthy and in range. My ferritin, which is iron stores, is on the low end of normal, but that's normal for people eating plant-based and may actually be protective. That said, with ferritin, I would still aim for the low end of normal, not below range. So this is something that I will focus on so that it stays in range, particularly as I'm increasing my exercise levels ahead of a marathon. A little more focus on foods like pumpkin seeds and spinach that are really rich in iron, and adding lemon juice to meals, to salads, because vitamin C increases iron absorption.
The next being iron. And correct me if I'm wrong, but iron works similarly in that its absorption is impacted by your vitamin C levels, or taking iron with vitamin C enhances that absorption. But maybe before even addressing that, talk a little bit about the differences between plant-based iron, in other words, non-heme iron versus animal-based iron, heme iron.
Sure. So there are two different types of iron. Heme iron is the type of iron you'll find in blood, and that's why you get it from animal foods. Animal foods also contain non-heme iron as well. About 40% of the iron in animal foods is heme and 60% is non-heme. And in plants, 100% of the iron is non-heme. Now, broadly speaking, to keep this nice and simple, the main difference is that heme iron is absorbed more rapidly than non-heme iron. And that is because non-heme iron is often bound to other molecules, which can slow down and reduce the total absorption. But that's not necessarily a bad thing. There is a protective effect of that as well, because we know that high iron in the body, and particularly heme iron, is associated with colorectal cancer and cardiovascular disease. So this is often, I see on social media this discussion around, well, heme iron is absorbed more rapidly, therefore it must be better. And I think we just need to acknowledge that more is not always better. That's not to say that people eating a plant-based diet don't need to think about iron.
It's the number one deficiency in the world, regardless of what diet people are eating. So this is a real issue. And so there will always be people that are eating a plant-based diet that have problems with iron. It's just part of being human. Everyone, well, not everyone, but a large percentage of the population are dealing with this.
Even people that are eating meat and dairy products 3 times a day are having
still
problems
people,
with iron.
There are absolutely still people.
Is there a genetic predisposition that is problematic with respect to iron absorption, or what is that caused by if somebody's eating plenty of foods that have iron in them?
Well, they could be, but also you're at higher risk when you are a female of childbearing age and menstruation and losing blood, and so it's not all boiling down to just how much you consume. And I think that's important to note. There are at-risk groups, and females of childbearing age are right up there with the most at risk. Is there a genetic component? Perhaps. I haven't read anything that speaks to that, but I wouldn't rule that out. I mean, a lot of omnivores are dealing with iron deficiency, and it's also not uncommon for someone from an omnivorous diet to change to a plant-based diet and see their iron status go up. That can happen. If we look at the population studies, again, just comparing omnivores to vegetarians, there is no difference in rates of iron deficiency. However, vegetarians and vegans do have lower iron stores. And you will see that when you do your blood test, and one of the tests looks at iron stores. So not the iron, the circulating iron, but how much your body is storing. And that is typically lower in plant-based eaters, but is not thought to be a problem as long as you're topping up your iron through your diet. I usually like to speak to ways to enhance absorption. A lot of people listening to this, particularly males, their iron status will be completely fine. And they don't really need to focus on this information I'm about to share because it is overcomplicating things. So this is more for someone who potentially has lower iron status and is trying to bump it up a bit. The foods that are very rich in iron are your legumes, foods like pumpkin seeds, dark leafy greens. Chlorella is a great sort of superfood that's super rich in iron. And what we want to focus on is regularly including these iron-rich foods in the diet, but pairing them with specific foods that will enhance absorption and trying to avoid some foods and drinks that can inhibit absorption. So firstly, talking about the inhibitors, coffee and tea.
Yeah, caffeine.
They're the two big ones. They can decrease the amount of iron you're absorbing. So if you're sitting down for a big meal with lots of beans and dark leafy greens, it might be a good idea to separate that coffee out at least an hour or so either side of the meal, and you will absorb more iron from that meal. Then there are a few things you can add to your meals to enhance absorption. The first one, and the one that is the most effective, is sources of vitamin C. And typically, one that I recommend for people is lemon juice, squeezing that over your dark leafy greens or your stir fry with beans. But equally, there are other foods like strawberries that are packed with vitamin C. So a snack could be dried apricots, which are super rich in iron, with some strawberries, and that's a nice match. Bell pepper or capsicum, we call it in Australia. That's another very vitamin C rich food. So matching these foods in your meals to enhance iron absorption. And then the other one that I think is really neat, and there's some cool science looking at this, is onion and garlic will both increase iron absorption significantly.
Oh, I didn't know that one.
So, I usually start any sort of meal, savory meal, stir fry or tofu scramble in the pan with some onion and garlic. And I think a lot of people do that. That can be a great strategy as well to increase the iron absorption.
One of the habits that I adopted a while ago that I still do today is I keep a bag of pumpkin seeds in my car with some fruit that's high in vitamin C. So when I'm driving around, like that's like my little go-to snack and helps me kind of keep things topped off.
You're on the program. If diagnosed with osteopenia, should I take vitamin K2 with vitamin D? This is a fabulous question, and I'm glad that someone asked it. If you've been diagnosed with osteopenia or osteoporosis, combining vitamin K2 with vitamin D can be very helpful, and there is solid evidence to back that up. K2 helps direct calcium to bones rather than soft tissue. There are several meta-analyses of randomized controlled trials that show vitamin K2 significantly improves bone mineral density in the lumbar spine and also the forearm, particularly in postmenopausal women with osteoporosis. The effects of vitamin K2 are more noticeable over the medium to long term, and especially in those already diagnosed with low bone mass. Ideally, you would take 180 micrograms of MK7, which is the most bioavailable form of vitamin K2 per day. And it's nice to know that compared to control groups in the trials, there's generally no extra adverse effects. So if you have osteopenia or osteoporosis and you're already taking vitamin D, I would definitely consider adding 180 micrograms of vitamin K2 per day in the MK7 form.
Another habit that I've adopted is eating, a few Brazil nuts every day or every other day, which are high in selenium, right? Which is another nutrient on your list. Why is selenium important?
So selenium feeds back to thyroid again, important for production of thyroid hormones. And as you say, it doesn't require a lot of planning to hit the selenium recommended intake levels, which are only about 70 micrograms a day, not much. 1-2 Brazil nuts will get you there. And you're also getting quite a lot of selenium through wheat, so whole wheat pasta or bread, and a lot of other foods like mushrooms. So you will be getting it elsewhere in your diet, but the addition of 1 or 2 Brazil nuts will just ensure you're categorically above that recommended level.
And there's something about the Brazil nut or the selenium content of the Brazil nut that has some downstream impact on testosterone production, right? For dudes.
I haven't read that.
Oh, you
That's
haven't?
Interesting.
Yeah, I think it's there's I don't want to speak out of school because I don't know, but I'm remembering something about that.
Well, we can look into it.
Yeah, maybe you can look into that, and we'll link something up in the show notes about that. All right, so selenium is important. Why?
So back to thyroid, it's
you already mentioned that.
Yeah, metabolism. I mean, it has a whole lot of different functions in the body, but it is integral again to thyroid health, which is integral to your metabolism and management of your body weight. So, I don't think we really need to go into too much more than that in terms of the biological sort of pathways. But the main point being, it's super easy to get in your diet. So although it's in this list of 8 nutrients of focus, rarely would a plant-based eater not get enough selenium. I just like talking about it because it's a nice one to point to Brazil nuts as a single food that people can look to ensure adequate intake. I want to start with my study on selenium. Do you eat Brazil nuts?
I used to intentionally eat 1 Brazil nut a day because of that little meme going around, 1 Brazil nut a day or whatever. Gives you a daily dose of selenium. But I now take a multivitamin that has, it's essential 8. So it's got 8
70
vitamins.
micrograms, I think.
Right. Is it 70? Okay, so yeah, I take a multivitamin that has selenium in it.
Might be 60.
And I take that every day. So I don't eat Brazil nuts currently. Should I?
Well, I alluded to this at the beginning. So in my book, I wrote about in chapter 10, I think it is, chapter 10, nutrients of focus. And I go through 8 nutrients of focus, how when you're eating a plant-rich, plant-based diet, how you can optimize these and make sure you're getting enough of these important micronutrients. One of those being selenium. And at the time of
writing it, I was pretty convinced that the best two ways were either to supplement with approximately 50 to 70 micrograms per day. So the RDI for an adult woman is 60 micrograms per day, adult man is 70, and you'll get a little bit through a plant-based diet, but unless you're eating Brazil nuts, that amount typically is around 40 micrograms per day. So the average person on a plant-based diet who's not supplementing, not eating Brazil nuts, is getting like 40 to 50 micrograms per day, falling a little bit short of what those RDIs are. And selenium, just to give you an idea of its importance, it is critical to immune function. It's important to endogenous production of antioxidants like glutathione. It's important to male fertility. It's important for thyroid health, the production of thyroid hormones along with iodine. So it is a nutrient of focus for plant-based eaters. And as you say, there is a general guideline or heuristic that Brazil nuts, if you eat 1 or 2 a day, that will ensure that you get enough selenium along with the other foods you eat to get you to that RDI, right? Which means your body has enough selenium to do all those things that I just mentioned. This study that I read was a randomized controlled trial out of Germany. In Germany, the levels of selenium in the soil, like Australia, New Zealand, a lot of countries, is actually quite low. So a lot of the plant-based foods we're getting do not have a lot of selenium in them. So they were interested in going out and getting a group of vegans. These were people that were aged between 19 and 32, males and females. And then they got a group of omnivores from Germany as well, same age. And they brought them into this study and they measured their baseline selenium levels. Baseline selenium intake in the vegan group was about 45-ish micrograms per day. And in the omnivore group was 64 micrograms per day. So interestingly, even the omnivores were a little bit below the RDI. But they did go on to measure actual selenium status, and it was a much higher percentage of vegans that had suboptimal selenium status than omnivores, as you would expect. There was 84%, to be specific, of the vegans were below the RDI selenium intake, and it was 63% in the omnivore group that were below that RDI. This study had an interesting intervention, but it's actually not the intervention and the results of this study that I was most interested in. So they brought the omnivores in and vegans from Germany, and they randomized each group into 3 groups. So each group, the omnivores and the vegans, then got randomized into placebo, given nothing, a Brazil nut butter that contained 55 micrograms of selenium, or a selenium supplement. And the reason that they chose the Brazil nut butter rather than Brazil nuts is the first thing in this paper that caught my eye. So all Brazil nuts come from Brazil, Bolivia, Peru, South America. And there is great variability in the selenium content of the Brazil nuts within a batch and also between batches, depending on where they come from. So they before they conducted the study, tested the selenium content of the Brazil nuts because they wanted to make sure that they were giving people the same dose of selenium from the Brazil nuts as was in the supplement to make it a fair comparison, and then measure how do selenium status markers change. Okay. So you're basically saying, okay, in vegans and in omnivores, if they have suboptimal selenium status, is there an advantage to getting the selenium from Brazil nuts or from a supplement?
Right.
But in order to do that, you need to measure how much selenium is in your Brazil nuts that you have. And this is where it was super interesting. So they found, and I ran the calculation based on the average Brazil nut being 5 grams. They found that the average content or the content of selenium in a Brazil nut varied from around 1 micrograms anywhere up to 25 micrograms per Brazil nut. And so based on that, the researchers thought, well, we can't just say feed everyone 2 Brazil nuts because Drew might get 2 Brazil nuts that have 1 microgram, and then Simon gets 2 that have 25. Simon's got 50 micrograms and Drew only got 2.
Right.
So they thought, what can we do? Well, let's blend the Brazil nuts up to get a sort of homogeneous level of selenium distributed throughout that nut butter. And they did it in a way where they were able to get 55 micrograms of selenium into a serve, which was 15 grams of nut butter.
Okay. That's small. That's like a teaspoon.
Right. This was, it's probably between a teaspoon and a tablespoon.
Okay.
A teaspoon is probably more like 5 grams, I'd say.
Okay.
So it's probably leaning a little bit more towards a tablespoon. What I thought was interesting at that point was the generalizability of this study, because I immediately thought, okay, well, they've standardized it. So both these groups are going to perform pretty much the same, unless there's something in the Brazil nuts that's increasing absorption or lowering absorption. Right? And sure enough, they pretty much performed the same. So you might go, okay, well, the outcome of that is, the takeaway is like, buy a Brazil nut butter or take a supplement. But then upon thinking about that a little bit more, I was left with this question. Well, how do you know the selenium concentration of the Brazil nut butter that you buy? Because it's going to be heavily dependent upon the batch of Brazil nuts that were used to create that. And so I looked a little bit more at studies that have evaluated the selenium content of Brazil nuts. And I found another paper, 2017, which admittedly I should have picked this up years ago. I wrote my book in 2019. So this was an oversight where selenium content varied anywhere from 8 micrograms to 200 micrograms per nut.
Whoa.
Okay, so now you're left with this sort of great variability. So even if you buy them and blend them, if what you buy, the selenium content is very low, then whatever you end up, your blended kind of absolute selenium amount is not going to be high. Right. So you wouldn't know how many tablespoons to take to get to 55 micrograms. It might be that you have a very low dose. Your Brazil nuts are not very concentrated in selenium, so you might need 3 tablespoons.
Right.
Okay. Or you might have nuts that have 150 to 200 micrograms per nut, and you're blending a lot of those. And so you're consuming way more selenium than the RDI. And the issue with that is the European Food Safety Authority brought out a paper in 2023, I'll put in the show notes, where they have actually changed the upper limit to about 255 micrograms per day. And that's where you start seeing some side effects of toxicity from too much selenium. So it would only take, a couple of Brazil nuts, if they were highly concentrated in selenium, to get you over that level. So with that in mind, paired with the fact that it's very hard to go and test your selenium status. So if selenium was a marker that was easy to go down to your doctor and get a test like an iron test, I would say just be guided by that. If your typical diet, you go and measure your selenium status, it looks good, then, probably the foods you're eating, the soil it's grown in, like it's the right amount of selenium for you. But actually measuring selenium content, a status, is difficult. You have to get serum selenium measured. You have to get some proteins in the blood measured that are hard and some enzymes in blood that most laboratories do not test for. This was a clinical test where they measured these things. So accessibility to test that is difficult. It's difficult to know how much selenium exactly is in the Brazil nuts that you're buying. You're likely getting a lot of volatility from batch to batch, from day to day. And given the importance of selenium in immune function, male fertility, thyroid health, all these things, metabolism that I mentioned at the top, I think the more precise way to go about getting selenium is through a supplement. And that supplement would be in the realm of 50 to 70 micrograms per day. So then, with the 30 to 40 micrograms you're getting through your diet, you're going to be definitely getting your RDI without going way too high.
Okay, so I've got so many questions, but one just quick one is, when you say RDI, recommended daily intake, is that different to RDA, recommended daily allowance? Like, is this an upper limit ceiling that you don't really want to cross?
The RDI is not an upper limit. The upper limit is the upper limit. So they're different.
250 or whatever you said, yeah.
Right. So it's okay to go above the RDI as long as you're below a level which we understand creates toxicity. there's some debate on where that is for selenium. So the World Health Organization, Australian kind of nutrient reference values suggest it's 400 micrograms per day. But as I mentioned, in 2023, European Food Safety Authority came out and said, we need to reevaluate this. And they dropped it to around 250 micrograms per day.
Okay. So my next question is, this kind of goes back to that, I guess, that appeal to nature sort of fallacy that a lot of people think is, if you can get your selenium from a whole food, surely that's better than going for a multivitamin or a powder or a supplement form. But you're saying in this paper, selenium status was not different between whether you got it from a Brazil nut or whether you supplemented. It was the same.
In fact, the supplement marginally outperformed the Brazil nut butter in improving selenium status in some of the subjects. So but I agree with you. I think the intuitive thought is, let's go to nature, right? So that starts off, that gives us a level of doubt about the supplement. And as a hypothesis, I think the food will outperform the supplement. Okay, let's go and test it. Okay, first thing we test here is like, what's the selenium content of Brazil nuts? And we learn a fact. By doing the actual testing, we learn this fact that now we take on board, the selenium content of Brazil nuts is really variable. Some of them don't contain a lot, some contain a lot. So now we're left with the problem of, well, how many Brazil nuts do we eat? And how do we know each time we buy them what the selenium content is of that particular batch? Because we don't have these tools at home to test them.
Yes. So the safest bet to make is to lean on a supplement that has the effective daily dose that you need to avoid deficiencies and not exceed into toxicity. But if you want to eat a Brazil nut every now and then, it's just not going to kill you.
Exactly. It's not poison. It's not going to kill you. I love the taste of Brazil nuts. And my emotions want me to lean into telling people, eat Brazil nuts. But the data here is telling me that that's overall, if you recommend that to a large population, there is 100%. There's going to be some people who suffer from that, either from not getting enough selenium, their thyroid becomes impaired, they have metabolism issues, they have male fertility issues, or there's going to be some people who get way too much and you create toxicity issues. So I'd rather just be guided by the studies here and say, what we do know is if you use a supplement, it's well absorbed and you're going to be in the safe zone. There's no guessing.
I love it. I'll tell you what comes to mind. Maybe this is another study that I'd like to see. I don't know how popular Brazil nut butter is. I know you can get it, absolutely. There's like ABC butter, which is like almond, Brazil, cashew. There's all these other, but you can make it, you can blend it yourself. I would be interested to see if you get 2 identical batches of Brazil nuts that have been tested to have the same micrograms per gram of selenium per gram of Brazil nut, where you feed people whole Brazil nuts versus the butter. Because we know that when you blend peanut butter or almond butter, you actually extract more calories from the peanut butter than the calories from the chewed version of the whole food that pass through undigested. So I wonder if you eat your whole Brazil nuts, where the selenium gets trapped in that sort of fiber matrix and you don't absorb as much selenium from whole versus blended.
I think it's an interesting hypothesis, and the hypothesis makes sense that maybe when you blend it, you make the vitamins and minerals more available. But there are studies looking at whole Brazil nuts, and I guess the chewing process is enough, because where they have used whole Brazil nuts that are highly concentrated in selenium, they've been able to improve selenium status. And that's where, coming back full circle, that's actually where this initial recommendation has come from. It's from studies like a randomized controlled trial in New Zealand, where they did take people with suboptimal status and fed them Brazil nuts, and they improved their selenium status. The issue is they were using Brazil nuts that were highly concentrated in selenium. In a real world application, you don't know what you're getting. It's highly variable. So one more thing I just add there is that whether it's a whole Brazil nut or a Brazil nut butter, there is evidence showing that they can improve selenium status. And so someone can point to that study and say, Simon's wrong. I'm not arguing that. If the Brazil nut contains enough selenium, be it the whole nut or the nut butter, there's evidence to show that selenium is absorbed, improves status. My question to you is, when you go to the grocery store and you buy Brazil nuts, how do you know that they are that concentrated with selenium, as in the studies used?
you don't. And we have evidence showing that Brazil nut selenium concentration can vary anywhere from 8 to 200 micrograms per nut.
Right. And I think that it's important to note that like there are so many foods out there that have varying amounts of nutrients, vitamins, and minerals, even within the same food group. So like you could have 2 oranges that have different vitamin C, or 2 this or that with different whatever. But when we're talking about something that you can reach levels of toxicity, this really does matter. Whilst like if you eat too many apples, or if you eat too much of, I don't know, whatever food, and fill in the blank, the risk is not as high as something like this. If you're eating 20 Brazil nuts and they all have over 100 micrograms, you're in probably some trouble.
Yeah, this is like one where you want to play a bit more focus, because it's easy to fall short on a plant-based diet as well, because most of the other foods are really poor in the selenium content. And as you say, it's easy to get to the upper limit because it's such a small range where you're trying to get to.
What are your thoughts on supplementing essential amino acids or branch chain amino acids? Is there ever a context where you think that might be helpful?
Yeah. So, I mean, in terms of the branch chain amino acids, my normal response is, why eat a couple amino acids when you can eat them all, right? I mean, it doesn't make a lot of sense to don't eat the full complement of amino acids. Obviously, you need those to build a functional protein. If you're eating, for instance, you can just feed leucine, you might get a little kickstart in the muscle, but you can't sustain the remodeling response because you deplete your intracellular free amino acid pool. All right. So I'd normally say if you're interested in eating branch chain amino acids, just eat a whey protein supplement, because that way, at least that supplement's already high in branch chains, and you're eating all the other amino acids as well to help support a more maximal response. In terms of, free-form amino acids are interesting, right? So they're easy to manipulate, meaning you can formulate those mixtures, no problem. So, a lot of times when you're looking at an ideal amino acid composition of a protein source, you want it to mirror the amino acid composition of interest. So for a lot of us, what I just said was your skeletal muscle is the primary reservoir. So normally you want to eat amino acid. You want your food source to mirror the muscle protein, right? So, we have a lot of nice work showing here's your amino acid composition of skeletal muscle. So if I was a manufacturer making free amino acids, I would match it, right? So easy to do that with. The problem is, as I alluded to, they're too fast. They're just too fast. They absorb in the circulation super fast. They come in and come out, right? So you're probably getting a good oxidative signal there with those fast releasing food sources. Now, Luc Van Loon has some work where he speculates that, free amino acid digestion is effective. I'm not saying it's not effective. It does work. But perhaps the utility would be in an aging population. We know aging has some issues with digestion and absorption. So perhaps, if you're an older adult who's having some satiety issues or compromised from a digestive health standpoint, maybe they have a role. But in a healthy individual, young to middle age, I just don't see their utility. And I certainly don't see the utility of branch chain amino acids. I've never really understood that, Simon. The whole concept never made sense to fortify your diet with free amino acids. I mean, a good example is, if you talk to the agriculture individuals, so largely they're interested in maximizing food production, right? So, I'm here at the University of Illinois, we have a big animal science and food, trying to maximize our agricultural growth and food production. They generally will laugh if you tell them we're running around fortifying our diets with free amino acids, because they've known for years it's not that effective. And actually in their models, they induce what you would call amino acid antagonisms, where, let's say, if you eat too much leucine, you could interfere with the absorption of isoleucine, and now you have a limited supply of amino acids, and now you've actually, in their models, impaired growth. unlikely probably to happen in our human model, but still, it just doesn't make sense to spike in a lot of free amino acids into our diet. You could argue that in an old person who has an anabolic insensitivity, throw some leucine in there, that perhaps it can help kickstart their muscle. But I really don't see the utility in it for most individuals. Let's put it that way.
You mentioned collagen earlier, so perhaps we finish here. Collagen supplements have become very popular for skin, and also marketed for, I guess, recovery from connective tissue kind of damage, ligaments, tendons, that sort of thing. How do collagen supplements compare to whey or common plant protein blends if we're thinking about muscle and connective tissue?
Yeah, I mean the collagen stuff was interesting, right? I mean the idea there is, you can eat some chicken broth, eat some Jello or gelatin. The reason they were doing that is because, sort of going back to what I just used, that example of skeletal muscle and mirroring the amino acid composition, they were, for some reason, doing that from the perspective of, if I eat, I mean, the most simple way to think about it, and it makes no sense, if I eat collagen, I'm going to stimulate collagen protein synthesis, throw in a little vitamin C to help with the cross links, right? But again, you got to think about, collagen has never been that nutritionally. It's highly exercise responsive, but it's not really nutritional. I mean, beyond its normal remodeling, it's never been really sensitive to nutrition because it's not really a good storage reservoir. Why would you want to make that a liable pool? Because it's so vital to transferring that force out of our skeletal muscle, to the bone for subsequent movement. So the concept doesn't make sense. And also in our normal eating pattern, proline, they're not rate limiting in our diets. So I've never really understood why they're recommending collagen supplements. I mean, I'll come back to your point. Just eat some whey protein if you're that concerned. At least it has a better amino acid composition relative to collagen. Yeah, the work I've seen in that area, I just don't see it doesn't work, and the science behind it doesn't make complete sense to me.
What do you mean by proline is not rate limiting?
I mean, look in our dietary pattern is proline, methionine. We're getting enough in our normal eating patterns. We don't need to be supplementing with these amino acids. I mean, that's what our guidelines are designed to do, is to meet our minimal requirement, right? And so the reason you would supplement is perhaps if you're not eating anything, you'd have, maybe it'd be beneficial, but a supplement is to be, it's that you're supplementing an adjunct to your normal eating pattern. And somebody who's eating a well-fed diet, it would make zero sense to supplement your current diet with collagen protein. I mean, it makes no sense. And I just don't see the physiological rationale. I never have. And the data doesn't support it. I mean, I'm not sure if you've been watching or reading the data coming out, and it's always been shown ineffective. And my point is, usually when I'm reviewing that work, they paint the narrative of why. But I'm like, at this point, we know the narrative doesn't make sense. So why, I'm not sure why researchers are doing that work still paint the narrative like it's effective, where we know, that might have been the rationale 10 years ago, but we know enough now that that narrative behind it doesn't make any scientific rationale. It doesn't have a scientific rationale. And it's fine if you run those studies, but just shape it as within the current knowledge. So based on what I've seen, certainly not an advocate for collagen for athletes. I mean, there's some stuff there I just don't even see it for the benefit for even if I'm injured. I mean, there's an idea there that so your collagen protein doesn't. So what you do is, right, like if you're a pitcher, you'd warm up your muscle a little bit to stimulate collagen protein synthesis, and then you'd eat some collagen to help with the repair and remodeling. But I don't know, Simon. not convinced, and the scientific literature hasn't convinced me that's an effective approach. Yeah, I mean, that's, I guess, my read on it. At the time, I can be proven wrong. I'm not an advocate.
There's probably a bunch of people listening thinking, "Damn, I'm wasting some money." Well, at least it's an opportunity to perhaps save some money going forward.
Well, I mean, again, I'm not here to tell somebody who's right or wrong. I mean, it's if you enjoy incorporating that, and I don't know the taste of it. A lot of that is like whey protein powders. Some of it tastes pretty good, right? And if that makes your life a little more enjoyable, just like if collagen, the placebo effect is huge. If incorporating that into your eating regimen somehow makes you feel better, then you can afford it, then I'm not going to say be you. I'm not here to tell if somebody's right or wrong. My only point here is I don't see the scientific rationale behind it, and the evidence isn't there to support it. But again, that's just what science says, and science is we're a little slow sometimes, right? So it takes us a couple years to get the information out there. So perhaps there's something coming down the pipeline that could convince me otherwise.
There you have it, friends. I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did and want to stay up to date with future episodes, be sure to hit that subscribe button on YouTube and follow on Apple or Spotify. Finally, thank you for showing up and the effort that you're making to take control of your health. I look forward to hanging out with you again in the next episode.